We still tend to keep things very simple. I think it's possible to get to 8 figures through one channel. For most of our brands, that's Facebook, it's Meta. For those who are maybe starting from a position of less available funding, maybe that's TikTok organic, TikTok shop in today's landscape with the opportunity that exists there.
It's funny when you speak to people, they do kind of repeat this same point of like, avoid the shiny object, try and optimize what you have and improve that rather than focusing on the new thing.
We're incredibly good at doing one thing very well, and we could do another 10 things. It will pull focus away and then we'll become worse at that original work stream.
Meet Ollie Hudson, operator, agency leader, and e-commerce growth expert.
I think ecom growth is like a sustained periods of like rapid growth consolidation. That's definitely what it feels like.
He spent the last 6 years scaling over 100 brands to 8 figures and beyond.
You always talk about those key inflection points, 6, 7, and 8 figures. Growth obviously isn't as simple as that, but we try and keep it focused on those fundamentals.
Join us in today's episode as we go deep into the D2C landscape of 2025.
There is obviously a consideration for brands in today's landscape. A lot of them are focused on improving AOV to offset like CPM increases, so we spend a lot of time there.
From silver bullet ad creatives that break revenue plateaus, to how unit economics is the bedrock to building serious offers that actually boost bottom lines.
We call those like silver bullet creatives. They often sit within that like unaware problem of like they bring people into market for a product. So it's like, how do we get to find one of those as quick as possible and most efficiently as possible?
Plus the playbook for new channels, new products, and new markets, including why the US is a completely different game entirely.
I always think the US is a little bit ahead of the ecom landscape in the UK. They're a bit more sophisticated. The competition is far greater. You can learn a lot just like keeping up to date with what's working there and following the right people.
So if you want simple, resilient growth hacks for your brand, this episode is for you.
And I think brands get very caught up with like shiny object syndrome of thinking that they need to jump on every new platform, they need to change things, and rather than focusing on and maxing out existing channels before doing something new.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying the videos, why not consider subscribing? We drop bi-weekly content that will help you improve your business right here on the channel. Ollie, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for the invite. Looking forward to digging into some ecom agency stuff.
Can we just get straight into it then and talk about kind of growth and scaling? So you've obviously been doing this for a number of years, working with brands of all kind of shapes and sizes. How do you kind of view growth strategies differently at different levels? And maybe if we take, the 6, 7, 8 figure mark, how do you think about growth?
Yeah, good question. For context for everybody watching, we're probably working with about 65 to 70 different brands at the moment across our agency portfolio, and we've had exposure to 200, probably more, over the 5 years of running the business. And I guess you always talk about those key inflection points, 6, 7, and 8 figures, the big three in terms of growth stages that people want to enter. But I still feel like growth obviously isn't as linear as that or as simple as that, but we try and keep it focused on those like fundamentals. So I think there can be good and bad growth, and that's linked to that whole idea of really getting clear on what good growth KPIs look like for a business. That shouldn't really change as you go through those tiers, and using that as our North Star. But then tactics and execution, obviously, it becomes a little bit more fluid below that by business. And we still tend to keep things very simple. I think it's possible to get to 8 figures running through one channel. For most of our brands, that's Facebook, it's Meta. For those who are maybe starting from a position of less available funding, then maybe time rich, cash poor, maybe that's TikTok organic, TikTok shop in today's landscape with the opportunity and the arbitrage opportunity that exists there. But for most brands, they're going to spend 80% of their marketing budget on Facebook. We should start there. We do start there. And it's about thinking about your brand position, about your products, pain points, products benefits through the lens of customers' pain points, and how we bring that together into like messaging and creative, and then how we build that and how we execute on on an acquisition channel of choice to drive conversion at the CAC that represents a good outcome for the brand.
Okay, and is that something you're kind of doing at the initial kind of stage of trying to find product market fit, or is that an ongoing process throughout, as you scale up past seven figures?
It's an ongoing process. I think that creative, we call it creative strategy. It's evolving depending on your size and position in market, how your category is evolving, may just determine like what you need to be focusing on from like an output perspective, whether you need to be going more like lower funnel, us versus them, trying to capture demand that's already in market of competitors, or whether you need to be doing like complete demand generation for your products, starting with fundamental pain points and telling a story of and positioning your products as the solution to that. I think what changes through that growth journey is like the data and available inputs into that process. So obviously when you're starting out and you're in that kind of six figure or pre six figure stage, like you don't have a lot of data inside your own business. So like you got to leverage, start with your product, really think about what utility, what benefits does it provide to the customer, and how can you get proof points on that from what's available on the internet. So whether that's like social listening, Reddit, organic, competitors, like starting there. Obviously as you grow and you start to acquire customers, you can get reviews, you can get survey data, you can kind of build a bit more confidence, even ad account data over what's working. But the process and the inputs, other than the inputs, largely stays the same.
Okay, and you touched on something there. So in terms of kind of capturing demand that already exists in a marketplace, is that what you recommend brands do when they're getting started rather than trying to kind of create it from scratch and coming up with their own angles?
I think it's quite an easy like starting point. So if you've got a product and you're entering a category where there's a lot of existing demand, or maybe there's some incumbents, a really good example of this right now is David Beckham's just launched like a big athletic screens competitor called IM8, which we did a big resource breakdown. You can find it on my LinkedIn, shameless plug, of like all of their funnels and strategy. But they've come in with this like product that's basically just a green powder competitor that's red, has better content and better like backed claims from scientists, a lot of experts in the creative, and they've so clearly across their strategy gone in and just gone after athletic screens. Ads are focused on them, landing pages, product pages, us versus them. It's a clear play to kind of get into market and take customers. I think that's very specific to a product. It's harder to do for brands like fashion, where like it's less problem solution, it's more brand led. So it's more difficult to do there. And it's also got a ceiling. Like there's a point at which they're going to struggle to scale beyond that, and they're going to need to go for like tiredness, fatigue, wellness. Like they're going to have to go more towards those fundamental triggers and build creative that kind of pulls people into market from that starting point.
Okay, so you think of it more as kind of for certain product categories, a better way to get started, maybe, or to get some initial traction, but soon you're going to have to kind of diversify beyond that.
I think that's, yeah, it can be a quick win. I think Facebook as a platform is really good at capturing in market demand, and you can be quite frameworked in your approach to that, like us versus them, which I've mentioned a couple of times. 3 reasons why, just very direct with those concepts, but the big unlocks in terms of growth of finding those ads that can take a higher volume of spend and do demand generation for a brand.
And I'm guessing at that kind of, 6-figure level, it's all about creative testing. And, obviously you guys run a full stack agency. Are there other things, other pieces of the pie that you're looking at that kind of initial stage?
Yeah, it's about, I think we're a massive advocate of keeping things simple in business, and like that goes for ourselves and for our clients, like, and that's through the lens of like you can break ecom brands into new customer, repeat customer. In that 6-figure phase, like your focus is finding one really good source of net new customer acquisition that's going to hit your target for CPA or CAC that nets out as profitable. Obviously, so yeah, creative is arguably the biggest lever, whether that's through, in terms of distribution, it's definitely the biggest lever. In terms of product gross, like product and offer, like I think that's the other like key area. But what's your product? What's your proposition? What's the offer that backs that? How are you taking that to market? How does it sit in the competitive landscape? How do you make it irresistible, etc.? But creative is the key for generating that distribution and demand. I think that's where you've got to obsess. Like obsess in that early phase of like, how do I get that distribution through the right creative messaging and frameworks.
I want to come back to offers in a second, but you mentioned there kind of, targeting and trying to nail this initial kind of process. Should people be targeting one ICP at this point?
I think you want to cast somewhat of a wide net in that early stage. I think you want to probably test a couple of ICPs or a couple of personas and start almost with like the problem or the pain point first, and then relate that to through and position that through the lens of like how that individual may speak about that pain point. I've been doing some stuff for a mushroom coffee brand the last few days, and like the way that a 25-year-old gym bro would talk about productivity and focus would be very different to a 35-year-old mother of two who is maybe rather than being focused on like workouts and output at work and progression of wage, she might be focused on like staying present with her family when she gets back from work, not feeling like she's got enough energy and time with her for her kids. And it's like those are different personas. It relates to the same pain point, but you can story tell about it in a different format, and then you can position the product as a solution after you've done that, and it'll attract a different audience. So I think I wouldn't say you need to be like solely focused on an ICP unless it's like really stands out, really clear. Like if you're selling a menopause supplement, like it's not hard. So you want to go like biggest problem over 35s. That's your route. But if you've got a product that can appeal to a few different people, there's no harms in like casting a slightly wider net and just thinking through that lens.
Okay. Is that just for that initial testing though? And would you kind of say at some point you want to double down, and maybe if we stick with that mushroom example, if it was new, for sure, like I get what you're saying, like you want to test different ICPs, but beyond that test, you just kind of double down, and then once you've reached scale and saturated that, do you then go beyond it?
Yeah, I think ecom growth and arguably business, even service based business growth is like sustained periods of like rapid growth consolidation, rapid growth consolidation. That's definitely what it feels like, and we call those like silver bullet creatives. They often sit within that like unaware, which I mentioned earlier. Like they bring people into market for a product through that by being slightly up the funnel, even when you're running them on conversion objectives. So it's like, how do we get to find one of those as quick as possible and most efficiently as possible? And then you can go through a period of like pretty heavy iteration. So you can take that same framework and message and you can iterate on it. You can change the format. So maybe you go from a static ad to a UGC to a high production podcast ad. You could change the creator and the individual in it, and that could be linked to the persona piece I just mentioned. You could keep the same fundamental framework but change the narrative so it appeals to a slightly different age group. You could change like the first 3 seconds. It's about how do we iterate on that framework that we found that we know works to drive acquisition at the right KPI, and that'll kind of bring that sustained performance. And then it's about splitting off a bit of that creative resource to then be focused on, right, how do we do more big swings that can take us on that next step, but also keep that iteration process going alongside that to maintain that stability and maintain that performance.
How do you think about the split between kind of testing variance versus testing, I guess, different macro big picture stuff? Like, what do you recommend?
I think there's no exact science to it. I think we want to be capping the amount of spend that a business is putting through testing at one time, because you can very quickly go from like 20, you can very quickly get to like 20% of total spend going through a testing campaign, and then that's by default going to have a negative impact on blended performance. So it's thinking about like, based on our position and spend and resource, like how much testing can we do. But it's about, I think the key is being really intentional with that. I'm seeing a lot of, one of the biggest things I'm seeing when I'm looking at ecom brands right now is brands who are making like 300-400 assets a month, but they've been spending the same amount for like 6 months and they've not progressed. And it's like, that is just testing because you've been told that testing is good and not because it's actually doing anything to benefit the business. Like, are we looking at every test and being like, what have we learned from this? What do we do more of? What do we do less of? What do we do differently next time? I think it's really important to keep that balance, speed, but also intention. And I'm a big advocate of just, big swings. Like, even when you're iterating on something, you should start with the bigger iterations first. You should change the format of the ad. So you should go from like a UGC to a high production rather than changing the headline on a static, because it's going to drive, usually it has a higher upside. And I think that's worth thinking about in today's like creative and paid environment. Hope that answered the question. I don't know if
Yeah,
it
yeah,
helps.
it did. How long is a piece of string is essentially the answer, right?
Yeah. You just don't want to spend too much like on paid, and you don't want to just be throwing so much at a wall that you kind of get, it can also get really confusing. Like, it's hard to
Mhm.
distill learnings from it.
And so, to those kind of brands that are, in your opinion, over testing, you would say to them, like, are you more profitable now that you're doing more testing, and what are you learning from these tests? If that doesn't seem to be, or they don't seem to be having good answers to those, you would say reduce the amount of testing.
Yeah, I can give an example. Like, what for the creative production, like, we'll run some regression analysis on like what's the R coefficient on like somewhat on an extra ad. So how much extra spend for this brand can we drive for every extra ad we produce in that creative production process? From looking, it's like 0.6 to 0.7. So it is a really good benchmark. So like 70% of our ability to spend more money is related to ad volume. Whereas some people will look at it and it'll be like 1.1 to 2. And it's like, that's a signal for every extra ad, we're able to spend another £50. That's probably not going to cover the cost of making that extra piece of content. So like, that's an example of a business that needs to take a step back and be like, right, we're doing a lot, but we're not doing it well. We need to like go back to the drawing board, redo that research process, ingest all the customer data, ingest surveys, look at reviews, competitors, the market, how they sit within all those, and build up a new approach to that. And I think you can do that. I'm talking through a creative lens, but I think you can do that for every part of the customer journey, whether it's funnels, whether it's landing pages, whether it's email flows, campaigns. Like, I think it's really got to be, you've got to take a step back sometimes and be like, are we getting closer to where we, our North Star? Are we having an impact on our P&L through all of this work? And if not, like, we probably want to rethink and rebuild a roadmap and rebuild the strategic approach to it.
Okay. I want to talk now about kind of offers and go back to what you kind of raised earlier. How do you think about like an offer creation process for brands?
I guess like we always start with unit economics in mind. So like, what's the unit economics of the hero products? Like, starting there, what's their gross profit contribution margin profile based on variable costs? How can we put together offers that provide a meaningful change in that number? There is obviously a consideration for brands in today's landscape that improving AOV, but a lot of them are focused on improving AOV to offset like CPM increases. So we spend a lot of time there. I think another benefit of when you're driving AOV up through things like bundling, cross-selling, is that your cost of shipping and variable costs outside of products usually become a lower percentage of total revenue. So you net out at a much more favorable margin profile as you drive AOV up. The downside of that is like, is the LTV impact. Like, it's very hard to drive AOV and subscription revenue at the same time in the same direction, because upfront value capture, you usually lose that subscription opportunity. It's a question of which do you want to prefer as a brand. I don't have a real principle to hand here. I think there's an argument that like upfront revenue is certain and future revenue is not. So like, maybe you're better focusing on AOV. It's a lot of testing and it's very brand specific. Bundling is a big one right now, obviously. Quantity discounts, GWP, gross GWP is amazing if you've got really favorable gross margin. Could often have a positive impact on LTV as well if you can really be intentional with that. Subscription brands, a lot of like welcome kits, welcome offers, surprise and delight subscription incentives beyond that. Like, yeah, I don't know, I've waffled a bit there, but loads of different ways to approach. But it's starting with that financial focus and like those KPIs in mind of like where do we want to get AOV or over time, what's that, and how does that contribute to like profit for the business?
It sounds very difficult. It sounds like there's a lot of kind of variables at play. Sometimes they kind of mismatch, and ultimately, does it come down to what the goals of the business are if they're thinking kind of short term, first order profitability versus LTV?
Yeah, and it's where they are in the journey. I think a lot of offers can have a huge impact on performance, even in those early stages. Like, I don't think brands test enough offers. They test a lot of creative, but they don't test a lot of offers. And yeah, it can provide a big unlock. So I'd say that's the biggest thing is just do more testing, figure out what works. But yeah, if you've got a subscription proposition, I think a lot of the time that needs more thought because it can impact current subscribers. If you go lower price, it can change the unit economics of the business. So there's just a lot more to consider.
And is it fair to say, in terms of testing stuff, you're kind of picking, or you found your kind of North Star or goal for the business, and then you pick variables that align with that and work towards, whether it's AOV maximization on first order or LTV, and you just kind of put the blinkers on and go.
I think it's backing from a forecast or like we use like a forecast as a plan. Like, here's our plan for the rest of this year. This is where we want to get to. This is what new and repeat customer revenue needs to contribute to that top line plan and bottom line. And then off the back of that, we then back into a test and learn roadmap by like work stream. So that could be offer, creative, post click, all of those things. But it's being really intentional around like what we need to achieve for each metric that impacts that.
And let's say there's kind of a brand owner who's, I don't know, done this as well as they can, and they've got a list of offers that they want to test. What are you doing there? Are you saying like create, custom landing pages, custom VSLs, or is it just, creative and kind of headline that's the most important?
You need to keep all the variables as close as possible other than the actual product offer. So I would take your top creative and change the landing page and just split test it. The difficult thing is you probably want to test it and then ideally wait like 60 days to analyze the data and to compare like AOV and LTV, and it will give you and you kind of want to try tie it to like lifetime value of the customer through the lens of profit. So like because your CAC could be lower on one offer, and you could drive less lifetime revenue, but that could still net out to be the best option.
Yeah.
Or your CAC could be higher on one, but you drive. You know what I mean? There's multivariable. There's a couple of variables in that equation, so you need to kind of give it a bit of time to mature, and then take a view from there.
I'll move on kind of past this topic because I think, it's quite a tough one and I'm putting you on the spot. But I want to talk kind of other bottlenecks there. So we've discussed, creative as a bottleneck and, people need to test more offers. What else, as you go through that kind of growth journey, do you see as bottlenecks for brands that you work with?
Creative is definitely the number one I'm seeing right now. Like, that's the area that people struggle to resource, keep moving with the trends and grow alongside spend, because it is a fairly linear relationship if you're doing it well. I'd say measurement is another thing. Like, as a business grows, its complexity increases. So more sales channels, more advertising channels, and the impact and contribution of one channel on another is something that brands often struggle with. Not so much in that early phase, but more as that business complexity increases. Like, if you're spending X amount on Facebook and you turn on Amazon, quite a few customers are going to buy on Amazon that found you on Facebook. How does that impact your targets? How does that impact what you should be running Facebook at as a target? And then how does that change like strategy moving forward? I think that's the big one. I think data and customer understanding is another. Like, brands, it's amazing how many brands just do not understand what their like top 10% of customers look like and how to go and acquire more of them. and what makes them, where they come from, what messaging makes them interested in purchasing, and how much value they contribute to the business. Because for most brands or businesses, like the top 10% of customers contribute an overwhelmingly larger percent of profit. So it's like that should be a big focus. How do we nurture those individuals? How do we treat them very well? And how do we make sure they don't churn? And how do we find more of them? So I think that's another one. And then I guess like the other side is like, I think one big bottleneck is like noise. I do still think that you can keep e-commerce growth and largely even our own business growth, like the more simple you can keep it, the better. And I think brands get very caught up with like shiny object syndrome of thinking that they need to jump on every new platform, they need to change things, and rather than focusing on like the biggest levers and the biggest and maxing out like existing channels before doing something new. I think that's a really, really big pain point currently.
And what about on the kind of finance and ops side of the business? Do you think there's gaps there that you see kind of commonly in businesses?
Yeah. I think in the early stage, it's like we spend a lot of time with brands, helping them sort of get really clear on like success metrics at a blended level by channel, and I think that's really important. And then building that plan, like forecast that plan, which we can then hold everything that becomes our like our north star, and like the way we judge progress and success. So I think yes, people struggle with that. Operations is something that I'm not as close to in the seat we operate in. We see a lot of different setups. I would say that one thing, especially with the stuff that's been going on recently, but one thing that's really noticeable is like some of our best brands are the ones that have gone the furthest down the supply chain and own and have the most control over their products. Firstly, that drives better margin, but it also allows them to be more flexible with product offerings and be more flexible with strategy, because they control that fulfillment, they control that logistics. Obviously, that's also a big moat, but it's a lot more complexity. So yeah, I think fast growth can bring a lot of problems, but and that also brings a lot of cash flow requirements, which I think businesses struggle with. Cash flow is a very difficult one, but yeah, ops I'm not as close to, but definitely notice that trend in terms of the best brands, top 10%.
Okay. And you kind of mentioned it a few times now in terms of channel mix, shiny object, etc. How should a brand think about, should we do this or try this new channel? What's the kind of thought process there?
I think in terms of ecom brands for like growth, you've got channels, product, and markets, and those are like your three acquisition routes. First, it's like, are we seeing real diminishing returns on our existing mix? So, like, are we not able to spend more money on this channel without our CAC going up? If we are, like, can we look at AOV? Can we look at new offers? Can we get better at creative? Like, can we just put more inputs into that process to get past that point? Usually, most brands they think they've maxed something out, but they've usually got another 50% to go if they just became even better at it. So I would always say, like, really be reflective before making the decision to do one of those three things, and try and push that back another month, 2 months, 3 months. Try and become 10, 15% better at what you're already doing. If you are at that point, then it's about thinking about your resource internally and whoever you're working with, and picking one of those three things. And I think that's sometimes quite unique to each business. Like, would that business be better going on to TikTok rather than launching a new product or a new hero SKU? I think the decision making framework to look at that is like, what AOV profile do they operate in? Who's their buyer? What impact does TikTok have on their marketing mix if they make it work? What total spend do you think you can get it to, etc., etc., etc. If you're like a £200 AOV product, I'm probably not going to go into TikTok. I might go into YouTube. Is it worth just looking at another product? Like, brands need to take a step back when they're at that point and analyze whether they've got the resource and where they're best placed to go next in terms of that continuing that acquisition growth. And the reason we always like caution against just like going and doing another channel, and it's like, it takes a lot more resource than you probably think it does. and it takes a lot more time. And I think that's the point at which leveraging like specialist agencies, like we've got a TikTok proposition that does TikTok shop and growth for those brands, where we tend to work with brands that are spending a lot on Facebook and need to look at that new growth channel. And we're set up to do it really well, and we focus only on that in that business unit. So working with a specialist when you choose to do that, and sort of learning off them, and then internalizing it further down the line if you want to do that, is like a real balance of like minimizing downside risk, maximizing upside. But it always takes more time and resource and cost than you think it does, unless you get, not every time, but most of the time. It's not just a case of just turning it on and it'll work overnight.
Yeah, it's funny when you speak to people that are kind of like working with bigger businesses, they do kind of repeat this same point of like avoid the shiny object, try and optimize what you have and improve that rather than focusing on the new thing. So that's kind of what you're saying here, right?
I think it's the sign of a really mature business operator when they, because I think the bigger you get, the more able you become to do more stuff, and the more you should try and avoid actually doing that. Like most businesses are like we're incredibly good at doing one thing very well, and we could do another 10 things, but it's like it will pull focus away, and then we'll become worse at that original work stream. So yeah, I think that's definitely true.
For sure. I want to kind of touch on you guys now then. So Saw
Yeah.
and kind of what you guys do. I want to just start off by, saying you've raised a lot of, very smart marketing points so far. Some businesses are trying to do kind of all of their marketing in-house and try and figure this out rather than work with someone like you. What do you think they're missing out on by kind of doing that, and what's the impact of that?
It comes down to like context. I think one of the big things we have is context. I think it's one of the unique things around running a service based agency in any niche is you just get exposed to a vastly greater level of context that it's really hard to create that in another vehicle. So if you've got a head of growth or a CMO in a business, like they have to be super intentional to reproduce that context window through network and through learning and through sophistication and like and the same goes for people and expertise and like specialization of labor and individuals. Like that's what we're very good at, is like we put really good people in seats where they're just meant to do one thing very well for a number of businesses, and even they benefit from context and they benefit from repetition and specialization. I think it's possible to build that in an ecom brand. There's many. We interviewed a guy from Surrey Toothbrush, which you might have seen, the really nice electric toothbrushes, on our podcast the other day, and like he's got an amazing growth team, amazing creative function, done like 30-40 million of revenue in 30 months because they've nailed it. But he said on the podcast he found a really good growth marketer and he built that function out, and it's down to those individuals. So I think it's possible. I don't think there's different ways to do it, but I think there's more risk involved in doing it internally, especially in the early stages. There's less flexibility in hiring a 3-person team, for example, than there is in bringing on a specialist agency in those early stages of growth.
Just touching on that, do you think there's a certain size brands get to where it does make sense to bring a lot of these functions in-house?
I think there's a certain size you get to where you need in-house marketers and growth and retention people. What that looks like depends. Like we've got some of the biggest brands in the UK on our portfolio, and we still service them. And for some of them, we make all of their creative. For others, we will do our creative work stream, and then they'll run another, and it'll become like a process between our team and their team. I think it's always beneficial to have an external team working on your creative if you can afford it, because it's an injection of new ideas. You can become too close to an issue, I think, often. It keeps that context. I think from like a growth market perspective, I'd argue that once you get to a certain scale, like it makes sense to have someone in there who's overseeing strategy. But then, like, should they really be in the ad accounts? Probably not. And it also, like, when building an internal team, something we have to do really well is management of people, HR, development of talent, because we sell people and we're doing it over a very wide number of individuals. A lot of people or businesses in the e-com space aren't very good at that from seeing it firsthand, and they need to appreciate that's something they'll have to do and they'll have to resource properly there. So I think there's many ways to skin it, and I think you can do it. There's a point at which it definitely becomes worthwhile having a team internally, but I don't think it needs to be like one or the other. It's about
Okay.
like how do you build the right resource really around that goal, like, and that could be split in all internal or all external.
Okay. And what do you think, like, I guess outside of marketing, what should the brand kind of keep, like, 100% keep in-house and focus on, in your opinion?
CX, customer service, for sure. Because customer service is probably like I think customer experience rather than customer service. I think you want someone who's obsessed with, yeah, like really focused on like that side of the business. Maybe a couple of people. I think as you get bigger, like obviously community is like probably the ecom buzzword of 2025. If you were to pick one, it's like community. Everyone wants to start a community. I think a lot of people see that in an exercise, think that's like an acquisition route. That's not. It's an exercise in increasing LTV from your top customers. I think that sits under customer experience as well. Like someone who's obsessed with customer journey, how they like every touch point past the point of purchase, and making sure that like experience is dialed in, and the customer service is a part of that, but not all of it. I think data can drive a lot of really good decision making. They don't necessarily need to be in house, but I think that's something brands under leverage is data, especially as they grow, especially as you start to figure out acquisition. You've got a lot more to work with. Product, all of that side, like product development. I think like there's more fundamental pieces I think really need to sit in the business. And then I think the rest of it can be quite fluid depending on the company you want to build and where you're at in the growth journey. I think like the big thing that I think founders want to keep in mind is like the lower the opex, the better. Like the more room it gives you, the more flexibility it gives you. Like most ecom brands are pretty seasonal, so your ability to flex resource up and down out of peak is something you can't do when it's on your fixed cost P&L. And it's like really thinking through that, like with maximum intention, if you're going to add resource to that opex line item.
Okay, interesting. Coming back to you guys, you've said this before, and you know, can certainly see this as an outsider. You're working with a lot of the biggest brands in the space in the UK. Why is that, and why are Saw kind of doing better than competitors, I guess?
Better, yeah. Good to hear that people think that. I think we've been going for like 5 years, and like I started the business having run some brands myself initially. I think we're very like obsessed with products, and we call our service our product. So like product iteration, product development, moving with the market, moving with the requirement of what ecom brands need to succeed today. So like we've changed our service completely, probably 4 to 5 times in the last 2 to 3 years. We've completely changed how we deliver. Recently, we acquired a creative agency and we merged the two businesses together. So like media buyers, creatives, that is one service. It's not we do creative, we do media, we do them both in a pod that is focused on delivering an outcome against the what the business needs. And I think that's been another shift that's really benefited us in the last 6 months because it's what people need. We did it previously with like the finance, the P&L, the forecasting, and how we get more intertwined with finance to make sure they're getting success. I think those two things. A lot of our C-suite, I've been involved heavily in the weeds of brands, like growing brands. Our MD has his own brand. Our COO has his own brand. Our CCO has his own brand. So we've got a lot of people in the business who operate brands and know ecom to a level that benefits us. And then I think we've also had the benefit of just focusing on like education in our marketing output. So like Alex Amosi I once watched a video of him like give away the strategy and sell the implementation. It's like the one thing that underpins everything we do from an output perspective. We release these massive resource guides, which if you actually just executed them, is exactly how we do creative for our clients. But most of the people we're selling to are not going to take that and do it because they've not got the time. They're just going to be like, "Oh, well, you look really good at this. Maybe you should do it for us." So I think those two have been real separators. And then obviously hiring good people. I think that's like arguably needs to go at the front of that list because it all falls down without having great people.
Okay, I want to come back to people, but I want to touch on what you said first. So that kind of like understanding what the market needs and then shifting what you offer to serve that. How do you guys stay on top of what the market needs?
The context helps. Like the context, once you get to a critical mass of clients, you just start to see what works on a broader scale. Example of that would be the shift in like whitelisting and publisher partnership ads. Like noticed that about 8 months ago that it was really effective for delivering like pretty decent step change in growth, and that's just something we've then been able to share across the client portfolio and like helps. I'd say again the people in the business being in the weeds of brands, that helps. It's unique and gives us an advantage there. And then I think in the UK, looking at the US market is just like a really simple way to do that. I always think the US is a little bit ahead of the ecom landscape in the UK. They're a bit more sophisticated. The competition is far greater. The execution standard is greater. Customer expectations are higher. So you can learn a lot just like keeping up to date with what's working there and following the right people as well.
Okay. And now, like when you've kind of identified the market's change and you need or you might need to kind of change what you offer, how do you have the kind of guts to tear everything down and kind of go in that new direction?
It doesn't always need a full rebuild. A lot of the time, it's like adjusting a process to bring in something else. So for that forecasting piece, we adjusted our onboarding process. So we collected the right information. We then build out a roadmap for everybody who onboards, like a 3-month strategy, and we just baked it into that process. For the creative piece, about 2 years ago, it just started to become really quite obvious that creative was the separator. We started working with our an agency called Hamby Media, who we've now acquired. And whenever we worked with them on brands, we just got better results. And that's just such a signal that was like, well, this is clearly where the market's going. We're early to this. And then we thought, well, we managed to bring the two businesses together. For that, we've had to completely rebuild process and completely rebuild the way we operate, which is still ongoing and is a bit of a mammoth task. I think as the bigger the business gets, the harder it is to do that because it's a bit like going from being on a bike to driving a tank and like trying to turn. It's like it's not as easy to just course correct like overnight. It takes time, it takes alignment, and that's I think why you hear about like bigger. I think Jeff Bezos has always said it's like it's about like his job is to make like 4 good decisions a year. And I think that's like we're not comparing that, but like that's why he's probably saying that because he's like, do we go into this market? Do we invest this amount into AI? It becomes more difficult. It probably will continue to become more difficult to just do things, but that's good because it ties to that concept of focus and
Yeah,
like not pulling away.
for sure. You mentioned kind of people as the cornerstone of the agency business. How do you think about hiring? Like, what's your process?
Process is the key word. I think hiring has a rate of failure, like, and you've got to minimize that rate of failure. And the way you do that is by making it like as objective as possible, which is really hard because it's 2 people and you've got limited context. It's like I think interviews are not pointless, but you can only learn so much from someone in that period. So we've gone through. We've put a lot of time into building a process that's based around a scorecard, based around a couple of interviews, practical assessment, pre-screening. A lot of that stuff that you don't want to do when because it is a lot of time and quite laborious, but it is so important. And when we're doing that, we the scorecards that we use that assess people, like we rate answers out of to a certain number, and if they don't hit that number, we won't pass them. And it's like being very, very objective about our decisions, bringing references, etc. I think one of the big things that we've had to change over the last 12 to 18 months is making that like an always on process, so we never stop, because one of the hardest things for an agency is like matching supply of good labor to demand, because it's low volume of transactions and very not as forecastable. So we've just had to always be interviewing, always be hiring.
How do you think about in-person versus remote teams for agencies?
So that's a good question. We've got TikTok agency I mentioned previously, fully remote, saw with us in-person hybrid. So it's good to have the two proof points. I think if you put an in-person team against a remote team head to head with the same people, the in-person team probably wins 9.5 times out of 10. So I think it's probably fundamentally better to build and easier to build a very strong in-person culture. I think you have to be a lot more intentional when you're remote to build and maintain that. I still think like it fundamentally still backs up to like remuneration and pay and incentives. They fundamentally usually underpin behavior. Like show me the incentive, show me the outcome is like above all else when building a really good team. But when you get into like volume and scale, I do feel like and I feel like the society's shifted a bit back towards in person over the last 12 to 18 months. But yeah, I think it just takes. I think that's probably the thing. The main thing is like it can still work remote, but it takes more intention, and you have to just. I think you have to put like 50% more effort in to get the same outcome as you do when you're in person.
Would you say past a certain kind of headcount size as well, it's almost a necessity to be in person?
Almost the other way. Like we're getting to the point now where we're like a bit limited by supply of labor in certain locations. So like we have an office in Leeds. How many like really experienced growth marketers for D2C brands are we able to find in Leeds? It's a bit limiting. Like we've able to find quite a few, but like it's not it's not it's not super consistent. It's not super reliable. So we've got a team in Manchester, Leeds, and London. I think in that early stage, having everybody in a room just working towards a certain goal is it's like really enticing thing to think about. Going back to that stage of having like 5 or 6 of you in a office. But we've started to kind of tend towards the other way. But like I've said, we put a lot of time into HR, a lot of time into like communication up and down the business, feedback. So it's gone well for us so far. I think it refocuses you even more on that hiring process, because it's harder to spot when they're in the business. It's like harder to police and spot bad work, I guess, when they're remote. It's just about getting that hiring process right. A good person is good regardless of where they are, I think.
Interesting. I want to talk about kind of talent development now, which is kind of the other side of the HR piece. Firstly, how do you guys like stay on top of, I don't want to call it trends, but I guess kind of like what's changing, or what the latest kind of topics are in the space? And then how do you think about kind of distributing that knowledge out to the rest of the team?
I'm just a massive consumer of content and ecom stuff myself. Like I'm always personally always consuming stuff, sharing stuff with the team, sending links over to various people in the team. So I think, and I think a number of our leadership team are the same. Like they're very like consumed by development, progression, always learning, kind of. And I think you need to be in that space because it does move so fast. So I think that helps. We've set that expectation from the top down, and we look to hire individuals who are very focused on that as well. Like they're self learners. They're very like we'll ask them about where they consume content about ecom D2C in the interview process, etc. But then we've tried to bring a lot of structure to that process in terms of internal training sessions every week. We put out a lot of content ourselves, obviously with resources and things which people have access to. We do external training sessions. We bring experts into the business to do sessions on certain areas. We've just had a psychology expert to do some work with our creative team. So yeah, it's about building that roadmap, I think, and being intentional with it. But it starts from the top down. I think you've got to set that standard yourself, and make sure that you're not asking people to do something you're not doing yourself. Because if I'm personally not keeping up on trends, like that's a very big red flag because of
Yeah.
what we're trying to build.
So it's kind of, if what I'm hearing is correct, it's like you're, yeah, almost vetting for that in the hiring process, that people have that thirst for knowledge, and then like systemizing a process for that kind of distribution of knowledge throughout the team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I want to kind of move on and talk about, yeah, other things that you guys have going on. So you talked through kind of the acquisition of the other agency. How do you kind of stay focused? You've obviously got, yeah, a load of different projects going on, a lot of different hats I'm sure you're wearing across multiple businesses. How do you focus, and what is that kind of guiding North Star?
Yeah. In terms of, we've got quite a few agencies under an agency group. I think what they all are is operating within the same domain. Like they're all ecom focused, D2C focused, but just like slightly different permutations of that, like TikTok on full growth. And we've got like a slightly smaller agency that works with brands in that sort of 0 to 1 phase. So I think that helps because they're all different vehicles, but they're all there to solve a very similar problem within our ICP's headspace or business. So that helps. I think the big thing that we've been speaking a lot about internally is the idea of like a zone of genius. I was mentioning this just to yourself just before we got on here. This idea of like getting really good people in the right seats and like kind of leaving them alone to do their job. It's that ikigai of like what you're good at, what the market needs, what you enjoy. It's if you can get a lot of senior people in those seats, including myself, which is what I think I've got to at this point, it makes everything a lot easier. So yeah, that's really helped, and like ability to give accountability to business metrics, so things that ladder up to the P&L to other people in the organization, and knowing in full confidence that they're gonna, based on the roadmap and targets we have, set the agenda and work towards that and direct resource below them to that goal. It allows you to kind of, that's like delegation, that's like successful delegation, and allows you to kind of think about less and focus on doing less better.
Okay, I want to come back to that P&L point because I think it's really interesting. I want to kind of double tap on what you said about zone of genius with a simple one, which is how do you identify your zone of genius?
Self-awareness, I guess. It's like I think it's as much about like I would always inverse, like what does the worst possible day look like for you, because and work on excluding that first. So and that's going to be very different to every person, but like I know what I would wake up and be like, I've got this day today and I really just don't want to do it. Like I don't want to sit, it scares me thinking about doing that. And back away from like that, maybe do it over a week rather than a day, because a day is probably not long enough. But like what does like an absolute nightmare week look like? And how do you exclude, not add? And that's like most of that is about excluding or adding, and you'll figure out what you really enjoy doing. I think you usually enjoy doing what you're good at, so they usually come together, especially in a work context. And then what market needs is like, I think a lot of people's fundamental skill set can be pivoted into like different things. A really good example of this right now is if you've previously been a media buyer, or if you've been like a creative in a big agency. There's a massive demand for creative strategists right now in the market. And that would be an example of how you could take, maybe you're really good at copywriting and data analysis, and sort of repivot where you're still doing a lot of what you enjoy, but you're entering a space with a lot more tailwind in terms of like earning potential and market demand. So yeah, I think it's a bit of that going through those exercises. I think is really beneficial.
Super useful. Okay. And then in terms of kind of the extrapolation of that point of like, you found your zone of genius, you know what you want to focus on, then I'm assuming kind of gaps start to open up and maybe they opened up for you in the business. Is that where you go out to market and bring people in to fill those gaps? And then how do you go about kind of divvying up the P&L? And can you just talk through that process that you mentioned before?
Yeah, I have to shout out to our MD Matt, who's kind of worked through a lot of this in our business. We were fortunate of getting some really great people into the company very early on, and they've grown with it. So our MD, COO, and CMO all joined the business in our first 10 people, and they've progressed up to where they are now, and they've grown with it. Not everybody you would hire is capable of going on that growth journey. Like if you're growing 50% a year, everybody in the business needs to grow at least 50% a year, including myself. So I think like we were lucky to get to, I guess you make your own luck in some ways, but lucky to find those people. And so we haven't had to do it for too many roles, but I think when looking at like divvying up the P&L, I think whenever you're bringing like opex, like for us, non-delivery roles into the agency, so people who don't work on client accounts, the introduction of someone in that seat has to be tied to something on the P&L, because otherwise you're just introducing middle managers who don't drive business impact, they just manage downwards. That level of accountability to a KPI and that using that to benchmark their performance and their ability to manage a team towards an objective that influences our company's success. That I think that's how to think about roles that aren't involved in delivery within an agency. I think for our size anyway, maybe there's probably a point further down the line when it becomes less P&L based, more business unit based. So you might do that on a pod level, and then there's someone who owns 6 pods, and that person's got like a mini P&L almost there.
Mm-hmm.
So we very much think of it through that lens. Like if we're going to bring someone in who's non-delivery, what can they own on the P&L? How can they have something that they're very accountable and measurable towards?
That's really interesting. So even the pod leader or the person that's in charge of a few pods, you're saying their KPI is almost a line on the P&L, right? It's maybe a subline.
Yeah, like a KPI for that would be like churn. Like they'd be accountable to churn rate across those pods, and that doesn't mean that like we'd forecast in a certain churn rate over 12 months. It doesn't mean that they're solely responsible for account performance, but they're responsible for getting support from other people if they need it in order to make sure that KPI is hit. And that sort of diversification is really important, because you can't. I think that's something that business owners struggle with as they grow, is like removing all responsibility being centralized to you as an individual. And that's like that change from startup to scale up, because if everything sits with you, you just get into this like almost stress and just like, I think we were mentioning before, like decision fatigue, because you're owning too much and you can't specialize into an area that you're good at. And yeah, I think that's really important.
Let's kind of take the next step. So we've, identified the zone of genius for yourself. You found people and given them things to own, and KPIs to work towards. How do you incentivize that to make sure that they're kind of working towards that path correctly?
This is something that we're bringing into the business at the moment. We've only just started with some sort of C-level incentives. If I could rewind, I wish I'd done it more, because I think it's the ultimate driver of behavior is incentive, like beyond anything else. For most people, there are people who are more motivated by like environment, other things, which I think is needs to be appreciated. But the vast majority of people are massively more motivated by incentive than anything else. We've done it again tied to like P&L performance. So like if we're above an EBITDA target for X period, certain people in the company get paid a percentage bonus on that. What we're looking to do over the next period, I'm not going to put a timeline on it because it's I don't want anyone to hold me accountable to this internally just yet, but we're looking to do that down the company through business units. The reason we haven't yet is just because we started this process at like 80, 60, 65 people, and the amount of complexity in doing that in the right way it's like a job in itself. So we just need to we will get there, but we're not quite there yet. But yeah, it's very focused on business performance and like hitting targets against our plan, our forecast, and then rewarding people based on that.
Okay. And is that kind of cash bonus? And then I'm assuming for like super senior people equity.
Yeah, depends on the whereabouts in the company, but most of the time it would be cash,
Okay.
cash bonus.
Cool. I think just before we kind of round things off, then, so the final thing I want to talk about is just growth for you guys. How do you look at that kind of going forward? And is that kind of an organic or an acquisition kind of strategy?
Currently, for the next like for the rest of this year, it's organic. We're focused on we've got really good product market fit with what we do right now, and we're getting and it just feels like we've got a real tailwind in terms of new business. And I think in those times, it can be easy to start thinking about doing other things, whereas we should just really just do that aggressively until the end of the year. Probably even the start and first quarter of next year. Just focus on doing what we're doing now and just do it better and for more people. As we get into next year, I think we've obviously that acquisition previously went so well. It's been one of our best decisions as a business since we started. I think it's a really good way to expedite growth for agency service businesses. I think we've got really good business operations. We're pretty confident that we can apply those operations. Some of the stuff I've just talked through in terms of ownership, accountability, diversion, and the boring stuff, I guess. We're really confident that if we find people who are in like a similar vertical or service in a similar business, we can apply that to the company and improve outcomes and get an ROI. But it's just about having the bandwidth to do that well. And I don't think we'll have that for the next 12 months based on how we're growing organically. But I think it's a really good thing to explore if the right opportunity comes about beyond that.
And do you view past a certain point as agency growth is more acquisition and I guess slash acqui-hire?
I don't think necessarily. I think you've got to be really intentional as you grow to not just grow outwards, but also grow upwards. Like you don't want to be adding just more and more and more clients. You need to also try and grow their value by whether that's billing model and incentive alignment, whether that's more offers, but not doing it's that balancing that focus and that expansion of revenue is key. But I think you've got to be really intentional with that because you need to grow average client value alongside full cost of talent, which naturally grows as the business grows. So I don't necessarily think so. I think it's a much quicker. You can accelerate that process, and you can get access to another pool of clients. But I think what that business, for it to be a really good opportunity, has to have is like a front end or a client acquisition pipeline that supplements ours. Doesn't completely rely on the way we're generating business because that makes it infinitely more valuable.
Final point on that is in terms of geographies, what do you guys think there? I'm assuming you guys are mainly UK based at the minute, right?
Yeah. Well, I know I've discussed this with yourself previously, but like US is a massive thing we want to target. We get a lot of our business inbound, and as a result of that, it's very UK focused, just from the audience we've managed to attract to date. But the opportunity in the US market is just so substantially greater. Like it's hard to comprehend until you've seen how much bigger it is. Like you can spend 100 million quid in a year for a brand on Facebook in the US, and it's just like not even a problem. Whereas you can't spend more than like you try and spend that in here, and you'd be reaching every person about 19 times. So it's like it's just just from that first principle, it's a big opportunity. So yeah, we want to do a lot there, and maybe even Germany. We've had a few conversations around that as like going the other way because I think a lot of brands want to go into that market, but again, it's resource, it's time, and it's bandwidth to do both of those things, which we just need to get right.
Okay. And do you do that just out of interest for your current brands? Do you help them kind of expand internationally?
Yeah, we do. We help towards the US currently, and we've had a couple of really big wins recently in terms of making that work for brands. It's more competitive. It's a little bit it's difficult. It's not as the case. Sometimes you can just turn the taps on and it works, but other times you have to really like be intentional with breaking it off as a work stream. We haven't yet tackled Germany again because I think buyer behavior, customer expectations, like the way they shop there is bank transfer rather than credit card. It's just very different, and we've not spent enough time getting good at that. So, but we are going to focus on that probably towards the end of this year.
Okay. Well, look, Ollie, thank you so much for coming on. I've learned a lot, and I think there's a lot of valuable information you've dropped on kind of the ecom game and the agency side there. So yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No, good. Where can people that want to kind of follow you or find out more, where can they find you?
Ollie Hudson on LinkedIn is probably the best place. Ollie, you will get peppered by my daily content, so beware for that. Or if you're really into the D2C space, we've got D2C, D2, the letter C, the number, sorry, and then the letter C. Diaries on YouTube, which is our podcast, long form podcast, which hopefully is quite
I
valuable.
will put a link in the description, and I think follow you on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of valuable info on there. Just a final couple questions on that. So, what size brands do you guys work with at SOAR, and if people are interested, is it any industry or what's the focus?
Yeah, we work with any vertical. I think for SOAR with us, we're looking at like 7 figures a year and above. Is our sweet spot now. However, we've got Launch with us, which is our like funny names, I guess. See what we did there, which is our lower ticket, like similar proposition, just for smaller brands, with the same focus. So hopefully we can work with most people.
Perfect. Thank you so much again for coming on, Ollie. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Scaling an ecom brand is hard. That's why we're on a mission to share as much info as we can to help make it easy. From weekly interviews with the biggest names in the space to case studies, brand breakdowns, and tips and tricks, and much, much more. Subscribe so you don't miss out.